Hi, everyone. Stephen Vantassel here, Wildlife Control Consultant, bringing another episode of Living the Wildlife on the Pest Geek podcast family. And so I have the privilege today to be with Dr. Quinn of the University of California Division of Agricultural and Natural Resources. And she is, get this title, everyone, Human Wildlife Interactions Advisor. So basically, she's a kinder, gentler me. So, but I teach people how to kill stuff, but she's clearly doing something a lot more touchy-feely, but she's from California, so what else would you expect? But she talks about killing animals too, so don't worry about it. She's a great person. We're really glad to have you on the show. She's here to talk to us about her research dealing with coyotes. And we all know that coyotes are sort of the great animal of wildlife control. People have, they love talking about coyotes. We're going to talk about coyotes today and the work that she's doing on California, because California has a long history and experience with suburban areas and coyotes, and she's going to talk about some of her research. Dr. Quinn, thank you for coming on the Pest Geek podcast. Tell us a little about yourself.
Thanks, Stephen. Well, I may be in California, but I'm definitely not from California.
No,
so
don't
tar us all. Don't tar us all with the same brush. I'm originally from Ireland. I have a BSc and a PhD in small mammal ecology. And while I have the title of Human Wildlife Interactions Advisors, I've been actually whacking rats for a long, long time across the globe in different countries, as far away as Southeast Asia and Central Europe and Ireland and the UK and now in California.
What's your favorite rat?
Do you know what a southern Luzon cloud rat looks like?
I do not. I have never heard of that rat before, so I learned something new today. A southern Luzon cloud rat. So Luzon, yes. That'd be Philippines, right?
The Philippines.
Philippines. Yes. Okay, so I have not heard of that rat. So just give us a snippet of what this cloud rat means. It must be arboreal. Is it a tree rat?
They're tree rats, and they're absolutely massive. And one of the pictures that I have that I absolutely love is these people in the Philippines captured this cloud rat, and they're edible. Most rodents are edible. And to show the size of it, they have their family chihuahua in the picture next to this enormous rodent, and it just cracks me up every time it comes up in my memories. And
are we talking raccoon size, 10, 15 pounds?
Yeah, massive, absolutely. You've never seen anything like it in your life. Massive, the spineless porcupines of Southeast Asia, essentially. They're massive.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay, I have not heard.
The northern Luzon rat actually looks kind of like a porcupine without the quills. So there,
really?
There's as you know, there's just the most ridiculous abundance of rodents in the world. I don't know why people want to study sharks and tigers and elephants when there's all these rats running around the place.
Well, they're charismatic megafauna, right? I mean, that's kind of the difference. So that's an amazing rat. Well, tell us a little bit about your research with coyotes. What are you doing out there in California with coyotes?
Well, as you said, California has a long history with urban coyotes, and we may have the longest history with urban coyotes in the United States. And I am not a coyote biologist, and I never pretend to be one. Okay. But I kind of got stuck with them when I moved to California because, my job is to, as most extension advisors in California is to, work with the public, find the problems, fix the problems, and then extend information on how to do so. And in California, there was a huge problem, and it was kind of multifaceted with coyotes, because we have these, coyotes that are eating lots and lots of cats, but we also have the problem in California where coyotes are also exposed to lots and lots of rodenticide. So my research kind of took two different kind of prongs to these two different issues. And so the first was kind of focusing on the rodenticide, and that was almost the easier part. It's a very complicated problem, but it was easier to kind of get the research, get the funding. The second part involved catching coyotes, and as I tell everybody in Ireland where there are no coyotes, that catching coyotes is a mug's game. I don't know why anybody would want to do it for fun, because I don't think that what we have to do is fun at all. It takes a lot of patience.
So what are the tools you're using to do that?
So we're in California, and so we are limited. I'm also limited because I work for a university. We have kind of have to get something called an SCP, which is scientific collection permit. So the state kind of mandates what we use, but I also have to get something called an IACUC, which is Institutional Animal Care and Use Committee. And they are, I mean, they do an important job. They make sure that what we're doing is ethical and like we're not essentially wasting wildlife for our research. So they make sure that there's enough wildlife, that we're not, like sometimes they're like, actually, you have to kill more, you have to trap more to make your wildlife worth it. And sometimes they're like, well, actually, you need to reduce your numbers because your effort is, your effort needs to be smaller. And so, so we are limited to a colorum, Belle Isle, and also just your regular neck snares. Now, the trappers that I work with, they have the most experience with the colorum and Belle Isles, but because we're in California again, and like, I guess, most researchers across the United States, we want to limit our any kind of non-targets that we might come across. So usually our approach is, when we first get there, is we usually start with the colorum. We use cellular game cameras that watch our traps, because under our scientific collection permit and our IACUC, we have to respond in less than 2 hours.
Wow.
And so, yes, like your Norman trapping laws would usually be like once a day, once every 24 hours, something like that. Right. And so for us, it's like, we have to respond like that essentially. And so I don't get a lot of sleep. And so National Geographic lied to me, Stephen. They make it look very, very glamorous, where in fact it's just like I'm kind of walking around like this most of the day with my eyes kind of trying to keep my eyes open with matchsticks. And so we usually trap in multiple sites in an area at one time to try and maximize our efforts. And I have to say, we were kind of crap at it when we started. Now, my trappers are very, very experienced, but they trap nuisance wildlife. They know they're in areas where maybe coyotes are known to maybe take slightly more risks. And in my head, I'm so naive. Like, as someone that has trapped rats like for most of her professional career, to move to coyotes, I was so naive, Stephen. Like, I had no idea how wily they were, and how difficult it was, and like how everything just works on. As a scientist, it's hard for me to say this, but I feel like trapping coyotes, a lot of it is intuition and not science sometimes.
Right.
And so my trapper might come up to a site and I think, oh, this is great. This will be great for the study. It's in a really nice urban area. And he's like, no, I don't like it because, this person over here could see this trap, and we don't want that because we don't want anyone to disturb our trap. We don't want, oh, I see dog footprints over there. We definitely don't want to catch a dog. And then sometimes he's just like, yeah, I don't like it. We're not going to trap here. And I trust him. Like, but it goes the other way. Like, sometimes he'll go in there and he'll be like, oh, I really like this I really like this site. This is great. And I think I get all like warm and fuzzy, and I'm like, oh, great. I'm not going to get any sleep this week. Which is a good thing. I mean, It is a good thing. And so like we started off and we were months and months and months just trapping in the wrong sites. We really were trapping in the wrong sites. There wasn't a lot of activity. I kind of had this idea in my head that I wanted to be in, these super urban areas, and it just didn't work out for us. And so we kind of modified our approach slightly, and we started to go to neighborhoods that were kind of more like kind of peri-urban, like, so these like some kind of nicer neighborhoods, to be honest, that were just like backed up to like more like hills. Right. We trap a lot in debris basins, which kind of is weird to me as well, because when I first came here, like when I think of like America and the movies, and as an Irish person, and I'm sure Americans have the same kind of idea of Ireland, and the things that stick in my head are tumbleweeds,
right,
and the big, massive, cemented over channels in Los Angeles. That people right. like the bad guys drive down, essentially, right? Yep. Those are the two things. So I was very, very excited the first time I ever saw a tumbleweed, but then I couldn't understand when I got here that they have these big, massive channels and no rain. Like, it literally just never rains here. But yet, when it does rain, it all comes at once. We have like 2 days of rain, and it's basically like, 3 months of rain all come at once. So we have these really great networks of debris basins that are almost at the back of these urban, like these suburban communities, and we trap there, and we were very, very successful. And then the other place we were very, very successful was golf courses. And of course, golf courses are in among these urban communities as well. So it's important for me. Like, I trust my trapper. Well, I am not the trapper. I'm the person that comes along with the drugs and the collar and the science. But I can't do any of that without my trapper. And my trapper is just, we try different things. We have a few different lures. We get advice from other people. We've had people as far north as Chicago or in Illinois reach out to us to say, hey, you should try like Shien's breaks or whatever it's called, or you should try this. And I always say they smell like bum sushi, like it's like bad.
Yeah.
All those lures smell like bad fish to me. I'm like, I don't even know.
There's quite a world. What Rob Erickson did was he would put a trail camera up, and again, his would be cellular as well. And what he would do is he would monitor the site looking for activity before he would set the trap. And I think he would do that for like a week. So that was his strategy, because he wanted to see how many dogs were coming through that particular area, as well as the coyotes and what people, because he was trying to avoid people. But that certainly, so that might be something to think about in terms before you even place the set. You just simply have the camera there monitoring the location for how much activity. You might see some coyotes move. Oh, now we have a location where we know they move by. It's all location. And then the lure just brings them the last 10 feet maybe. So they're very much. So what was the goal of the study? Is to do what?
I'm in California, right? So nobody wants to kill anything in California. And that is especially true for our charismatic megafauna. So, mountain lions, coyotes, pretty much. There's even I Love Possum societies in California, even though possums aren't even native to California. And so in California, there's a big push for hazing of coyotes in urban environments. And so as a cooperative extension advisor, we're not even allowed, I couldn't tell you, hey, use X product on rats, use this trap on rats, use this trap on gophers, use this rodenticide on squirrels, unless it's been studied and we know, and we have literature to say, look, we know that strychnine works better than aluminum phosphide, or, actually trapping is more efficacious for gophers than, whatever.
Right.
And so we can't say that. And so as a cooperative extension advisor, I don't feel like I can say, go out and haze those coyotes, because it works, because we don't know that it works. And also we know that hazing has had very mixed success for almost every wildlife species that it's been tested on. And so we know that bird hazing is very, very complicated. We know that bear hazing is very dependent on the individual. We know these things, and we know that hazing has failed over and over and over again. And I don't know, but, I used to say, when people used to say, oh, when the world ends, that all that will be left is cockroaches and rats, I'm pretty sure that coyotes will be in there too, to be honest with you, because they're so resourceful, and they're very clever. Like, they're very, very clever. And one thing I will say is definitely the females are more clever than the males. They're harder to catch. They're definitely harder to catch. Now, I'm not saying now, if you're to use a Belle-Isle, obviously a Belle-Isle is a little bit more indiscriminatory. But like when it comes to the collarum, like we almost always just catch males.
Interesting.
Wow.
Yeah. And so your goal there, so that's just started. Then you're starting. How long have you been on that process?
Well, we're over a year trying to catch 19 coyotes. And so it's been a long, long process. And we've had things like this happen to us. I actually happen to have, this is a collar. This is actually my collar in two pieces.
Yeah, the battery and the collar, yeah.
I won't use swear words, but I want to. This was chewed off by another coyote. So that we put this on a coyote and another coyote chewed it off. So essentially you can see the wire. So we've had actually, even though we've trapped and collared 19 coyotes, we were out 1 week this year. So far, usually we trap every other week, but we ran out of collars. So we had 20 collars. One of them never worked in the first place. And we trapped 3 coyotes in 1 week. It was an absolutely insane week. We caught one on a Monday night, one on a Tuesday night, and one on a Thursday. 20 minutes after we set the trap, we caught the one on the Thursday.
Well, that's nice.
But it was nice until it threw itself onto a car that the following Wednesday. And so like that was the first coyote we've had that's actually been killed by a car, which I don't know if any of your listeners have ever been to LA, but that surprises me a lot.
Wow.
Because it's great. Like the traffic here is crazy, even during lockdown.
8-lane highways, folks. It's amazing.
And so exactly. And I think that like a lot of the time the coyotes are actually very good at traversing the roads. And I'm not really sure what happened to that coyote. We retrieved the coyote and we retrieved the collar, and I have the coyote's body. I just haven't had a chance to do a necropsy, but like, I mean, I just assume it just got hit by a car. Like it's the process of, that we went through with collaring. There was nothing wrong with the coyote when we let it go. It got caught in a collarum. There's very little risk of injury in a collarum, which is really nice. Obviously with a Belial, we have to be really careful, but we're so quick with a Belial. And we also use thicker wires in our Belial because we don't, like, our goal isn't the same goal as the people that listen to the podcast. Like, our goal is to make sure that the coyote actually leaves the trap uninjured and goes. So it's so hectic, but the plan is to actually physically go out and haze these animals. And so, like, we will be interacting with the community, trying to get them to, like, essentially ruin the coyote's self-esteem and see if it changes how they use the space.
Okay.
Now, ideally, we would like to measure, like, does it decrease the amounts of cats that they eat? Does it change their behavior in other ways? But that's just really difficult for us to manage.
Right.
So scientifically, we can only really test is, does hazing, decrease the amount of time that maybe they interact with humans? So, like, do they go from more kind of a crepuscular type of activity to, very much in the middle of the night type of activity? Or do they change their space use where they move away from these urban areas? But what we're seeing is, and it's really interesting, now we haven't analyzed the data, but like, our coyotes, their home ranges are very, very different. So we have coyotes that are trapped very close to these massive natural areas. And like, you're talking about areas that could have mountain lions in them, or would have a huge amount of wildlife to support a coyote in, and the coyotes just never go near it. And so we have these coyotes that are living in these urban communities that could live in these very natural spaces and look like they're choosing not to. Now, it could be that maybe there's a pack that is in that area, but like, it's a massive complex of hills that goes on for miles and miles and miles. So, but then we also have coyotes that we've trapped in urban areas that do spend a lot of time in these areas. We've got other coyotes that you can tell that they take advantage of, like, teeny tiny habitats, green habitat blocks. So they're in, like, school grounds, they're in parks, and they use flood control channels. They use like the railway. We've one coyote that's over 12 different cities in Los Angeles County.
Wow. Yeah, so it makes sense to me. I mean, if I was a coyote, you'd probably get more food in the suburban area than you would in the deep woods. I mean, I think their range would have to be significantly larger in those areas to get food, where there's a trash can probably nearby in the suburban area. So you're also doing some work on anticoagulants with coyotes. Explain that a little bit.
Well, that was kind of the first thing that, I mean, we're in California, right? I mean, it's kind of almost the home of new pesticide legislation, right? It always starts off with us, right? We're the first domino to fall. And so with anticoagulant rodenticides, when I first got here, the first thing that came to my head is, and just for a bit of context, in Southern California, we're very much, apart from like the major metropolitan areas, we're very much roof rat territory. Okay. Actually, in Orange County, our vector control district hasn't come across a nori rat for over 10 years.
Wow.
Right. So that's how much roof rat territory we're talking about here, right? Very, very much roof rat territory. Now, if you go back and you look at the literature, coyotes, there was no evidence that coyotes ate roof rats.
Right.
And so there's one study in San Diego, and I felt kind of bad because I reached out to the researcher, and I think it was actually, I don't know if it was a master's project or like a summer. She did a great job on it. It was a really good study looking at scats, which can be problematic, but it's still some information. And so I reached out to her and I was like, there's no rats in the diet of your coyotes. I was like, do you think you just couldn't identify them? She's like, no, they weren't there. So I was like, okay, so coyotes are loaded with rodenticide, but they don't eat rats. So how are they getting their rodenticide? So the first the first things we started to do was we started to collect coyotes. And I worked at one of our local Cal State universities, Cal State Fullerton, with Dr. Paul Stapp, and we just formed this great relationship where I almost transformed his lab to this rodenticide research laboratory, which was kind of great for me. And so I remember him coming to me and he was like, "Oh, how many dead coyotes do you think you could get?" And I was like, "Oh, maybe over a master's project, maybe like 100." Well, that was the wrong answer, Stephen, because I think we're about to go through our 650 something
Wow.
coyotes over the last 5 or so years. Because there is a lot of roadkill, even though we're not really seeing that with our collared individuals.
Right.
But also there's a lot of nuisance trappers. Well, not a lot of nuisance trappers, but there's a few very busy nuisance trappers in the kind of LA Orange area. Because they're just everywhere. Coyotes are they're very densely populated in Southern California. And so we got all these things and we started to look and see what they ate, because if we knew what they ate, we might be able to figure out how they're getting exposed to anticoagulant rodenticides. And so they eat a lot of cats, they eat a lot of rabbits, and they eat a lot of roof rats. And so that was kind of surprising for us and something that we hadn't found out yet. And we're hoping to get that published very soon, actually. As you know, it takes a lot of work sometimes to get these manuscripts out and going, and we're all very busy. Mm-hmm. But the other thing we wanted to do was we wanted to look at what went into a bait station, because in my mind, before we started all this diet stuff, I was thinking, well, it must be something else. It must be like wood rats or native mice, or something's getting into these bait stations that we know that these coyotes eat. So we kind of had, we were kind of trying to get to the same place, but like two different
ways. Yeah.
And so we put these bait stations out in these backyards, and I think we had like 90 different backyards across Orange County in Southern California. And we had game cameras on them. And as anyone knows that's ever used game cameras, like we got like plenty of action wildlife wise, but we got just 5 million pictures of just leaves, blowing in.
Oh, I know. It drives you mad. I hear you.
And so that was another great master's project out of the Stapp lab. And so he looked at these. I mean, that was with our UC Master Gardener program, which for me is just the most incredible resource. First of all, they're just the greatest volunteers ever. But second of all, they let me into their backyard to do all this research. And it's like having these secured research sites, which is it's just great. And then they're also really good bakers on top of it. So like that kind of helps too. So we looked to see what got into these bait stations, and so we were expecting all these non-targets to get into these bait stations. Well, that's not the case, and like we were kind of blown away by how few non-targets. And so we had we got, in the first 30 days we were out, Stephen, we got everything but the mountain lion. So we had the bobcat, we had the coyote, we had the raccoon, the possum, we have squirrels, and like the main one here is the eastern fox squirrel, which is obviously not native. Mm-hmm. And then, wood rats, permiscus. The other thing about Orange County is house mice are actually fairly locally rare. So you'll only find them in certain areas. And my vector control colleagues tell me that she thinks that they're actually associated with military installations in the county. So like in areas where you have maybe army base, like old army bases, or, the naval base, you will get them. But everywhere else, like you rarely ever see them. And like you kind of see that across California, where the roof rat is really king unless you're in San Francisco or Los Angeles or someone like that.
So I want to just sort of explore what you mean by non-target. Let me tell you when I hear the word non-target, if I'm putting a bait station out for mice and a rat goes in, one way would be, well, it wasn't what I was looking to kill because I didn't think there were any rats there, but I guess it's okay, it whacked them. But I guess technically that would be a non-target because it wasn't the animal I was trying to kill. So when you use the word non-target for your study, are you saying an animal that wasn't on the label of the rodenticide that went in there? Okay.
Yes. So we're talking about like potential for off-label primary exposure. So the things that got in at very low rates, Stephen. So in California, we're obviously special again. And so that includes a lot of so we don't have permiscus on a lot of labels in California.
Okay.
And we don't, and we don't have our most prominent like Neotoma wood rat species, we also don't have on labels in California.
Okay.
And so like those we didn't say exactly call them non-targets. Well, the wood rat is definitely non-target, but like Parameciscus may or may not have been a non-target.
Gotcha.
But we're talking about like if a rat went in, like a commensal rodent was the target, and everything else was kind of essentially a non-target.
Okay.
So we looked at like ground squirrel, like a ground squirrel entering a bait station was considered a non-target in this situation, because obviously ground squirrels are not labeled for second generation anticoagulant.
Right. And so are all these, and so so your work is finding out what is your thoughts about how these coyotes are getting exposed to all these second gen, I'm assuming they're second gen toxicants.
Well, that was the thing, is that like we didn't really know. And so like we kind of had like all these different puzzle pieces and we were trying to put them together. So what we first found out was that they ate a lot of roof rats. And the next thing we found out is that pretty much in Orange County, the pest management professionals are doing their job and exposing rats to anticoagulant rodenticide. They're actually exposing, at least primarily, Stephen, they're not exposing for suburban applications of second generation anticoagulant rodenticide. There's actually a very low risk of primary exposure, which was just interesting to us, because it never occurred to me in a million years. Now, the things that we found out were we actually applied our rodenticide at 2 different levels. And I think that this is interesting because like we all know that roof rats spend an immense amount of time off the ground, and yet all our PMPs in California are controlling them on the ground.
Okay.
And so in bait stations on the ground. And so it's likely that that's not the best place to control them. So we looked at these 2 different levels of application, and it turns out that neither of them are actually good places to, we had well, I'll have to go back and look at the data, but like in yards where we had activity, about 50 to 60% of those, the rats never even entered either of the bait stations.
And how long were you waiting?
So we were in those yards for 3 months.
Oh my gosh. Serious?
And so we've just actually started again, and 30 days, is even worse for 30 days. So we just looked at it. And so it's funny because people always look at what happens inside the bait station. Nobody is looking at what's happening outside the bait station. And outside the bait station, the rats of Southern California are giving the PMP the finger, essentially.
Oh, that's amazing. So you tried elevated stations. I'm assuming what, 6 feet off the ground, 5 feet off the ground?
Well, kind of like chest height.
Okay.
And like it's mostly just for it's like for me, like in my head, I'm thinking like it's important to answer these science questions, but like the answers also have to be practical for the pest management professional.
Sure. So you got them on a platform on a tree, 4 feet off the ground, so they're easy to interact with. And then you had others on the ground, at the base of the tree or away from the tree?
So they were actually they were in the same yard, but in 2 different locations.
2 different locations.
So yeah.
And so what is the best place to bait a roof rat? Did you find that out?
So so we know, first of all, that block baits are not better than grain baits, but like you just can't use grain baits in a bait station for an urban application. It's just not legal.
Right.
And it's probably better to bait outside the bait station, but that's also not legal. Right. And so I think that the bait station needs to be improved. I think that I would like to we only looked at one type of bait station, but I think that we could look at other bait stations, other placements. We also used non-toxic baits. So we used like the main 2 that are out there, which is the Leafotech rat and mouse attractant and Bell's Detex. And so like all the things that we found out were so interesting. So we saw that rats responded really well to bait replacement. So like we were actually getting pulses of activity, especially in areas that had really high rates of activity. Like we didn't measure density, we can only look at activity. So places that had lots of activity, we noticed that every 7 days when we replaced the bait, you were seeing these like...
They like fresh bait.
Exactly, right? And so, but that's something we also don't do, is that like, we have these really long service terms, and they, it could be better. And essentially because what we know now, probably in Southern California, is that the target organism, the rat, is probably the thing that's causing the exposure. Now, I'm not saying that we have all the answers to the questions, Stephen, but we know that coyotes eat rats, and we know that PMPs poison rats.
Right.
And so, like, it's kind of like a little bit like A plus B, equals C, but we're not completely there yet,
So is
because
it? So my thinking is because it's kind of surprising for me that coyotes would be eating so many rats, because rats are pretty wary creatures. But I'm wondering, is it because are the coyotes catching the rats because the rats are getting some poison and it's weakening them a little bit, and so they're acting a little less nimble than they were, and so the coyotes are simply taking advantage of this easy food opportunity, or the coyotes simply feeding on a fresh dead one? Uh, any thoughts on that? Or, I mean, you probably don't know, but I'm just what's your speculation at
Well,
this point?
okay, so we don't know, but one of the things that we did was we had this environmental science student put dead rats in the master gardeners' backyards. I'm telling you, the master gardeners of Orange County, they need their own prize, because the things that they let us do for science
Yeah.
is just incredible. So we put these dead rats. We kind of pinned them down. We left them there for 7 days, and we watched what interacted with them, and it was actually incredible. So everything from like invertebrates to other rats to birds,
Hmm.
your whole suite of mesocarnivores, your coyotes, um, but we don't know, like, we assumed in that situation that all of those things were interacting with the dead rats, whereas
Right.
we just don't know. Now, you would think that with rats, but look at cats. Like, look how good climbers cats are. Look, like, they're not outdoors all the time, and they eat more cats than they do rats.
Yeah, well, that's a good coyote to my mind.
Yeah.
So we want coyote. That's I mean I don't coyote. That's a good coyote. So because they're helping get that invasive species off the landscape. But I suspect though with the cat is that the coyote is probably ambushing, and maybe the cat is too far away from a tree at that moment, and the coyote simply running it down, especially if the coyote has a start, or the coyote simply jumps and pins it maybe. Um, so that's what I'm thinking. Plus, I think it's also an indication of just how many cats are roaming around, ravaging your environmentalist California, which is always fascinating to me. The hypocrisy where people pin all their environmental love on one particular thing. Oh, I drive an electric car, but I let my cats roam free. I'm an environmentalist. Well, I'm like, well, no, you really hate the environment. So where does this come from? So it's interesting how we have our blinders on for what we don't think is environmentally responsible. So, uh, but it's so where are you at in this study now? And you've had 650 stomach tests, stomach
Well,
studies.
it's kind of a range. So some of them went to the diet study. Now we're actually looking at sublethal exposure. So
Okay.
the thing that anybody that's been to California, urban California, knows that there are a shed load of coyotes in Southern California, right? There's
Right.
just tons of them. And I don't even know if urban Southern California has reached saturation as far as urban
Wow.
coyotes are concerned. And so, because I think it is new, and like Rex Baker and Bob Tim and people like that have been like looking at urban coyote conflict in Southern California. And so, like, it kind of is like new. I wouldn't say like it's like, I mean, like it's like, you're talking about 30, 40 years maybe. And so,
Right.
like, is that long enough for like a large predator to actually colonize a whole entire environment? I don't know. And like, the one thing we know is that they're really opportunistic. And I think that we're going to get to the stage where there's going to be this whole source sink thing, where you have areas of the urban environment that are really easy to find food for coyotes, and areas of urban environment that are not, but you're still going to get coyotes there eventually.
Right.
Especially if they just, because of the nature of how coyotes disperse, and they have their family structure, I think eventually we probably will have more. And so yeah, so it's, I mean, there's just an insane amount, and so we never run out. But anyway, because of that, in my mind, I'm thinking, okay, they're all exposed to anticoagulant rodenticide, or at least the proportion that we get. And like our sampling could be biased, because we do just get dead coyotes. So,
Right.
Maybe coyotes that are just walking around the landscape, or maybe they're less likely to be exposed, who knows. But the thing about it is that we have coyotes that are walking around with like high levels of anticoagulant exposure. That's probably enough to kill them. But yet they're not dying, and they don't really on necropsy appear to be compromised either. And so we're kind of trying to look and see, like,
These are second gens.
These are all second gens. So we only look for second gens, and we look for first gens. And so we test for brodifacoum, bromadiolone, difethialone, and difenacoum. Now, nobody really uses difenacoum in Southern California, so we rarely detect it. And then we look for difascinone, chlorofascinone, warfarin, and actually coumatetralyl. And so you might say, oh, what's coumatetralyl? Well, coumatetralyl is an unregistered compound in the United States, yet we have still been able to detect it.
Interesting.
Which is interesting, but I almost hate saying that out loud, Stephen, because a lot of people just glob onto the fact that we're detecting illegal compounds, and it's a small amount, but it's still there. And I think it's good evidence that probably members of the public are using rodenticide illegally. But the other thing is that 99% of our coyotes are exposed to anticoagulant rodenticides. And so
proportionally, where are you seeing most the numbers? Are they getting poisoned mostly by second gens? Is that what you're seeing mostly in your data, or is it just kind of even?
Mostly it goes bromadiolone, brodifacoum, difenacoum, difascinone. So yeah. Okay. Well, there's about 65% or so of our sample is exposed to difascinone. And it'll be interesting because as things move in California, I would expect to see exposure to difascinone actually increase as PMPs switch from, second gens to first gens, or maybe acute rodenticides. But we don't look for acute rodenticides, and like we should, but like it's just so expensive. Like, essentially it's the same as like if you want to test for bromethylene or cholecalciferol, it's more complicated of a process. And it's likely that they could be there. We just don't test for them. And like, it's one thing that we've learned, like if you look for something, you'll probably find it.
Sure.
And like coumatetralyl was added to our panel by mistake, and then lo and behold, there it was.
So where would they be purchasing this online? Because it would be what, Mexico? Is it legal in Mexico?
Well, I have to tell you, Stephen, that the detection of coumatetralyl started a very strange hobby of mine, which is how much illegal rodenticide can Neve purchase over the internet? And it's
a lot.
It's a lot.
Yeah.
I mean, a lot. Now, it's actually not that easy in California, because California with like things like eBay and the other one, or Amazon is they have kind of strict enough filters, but their filters are broken, and I know how they're broken because I know about the pesticides, and so I can get around it. And I've tried to work with EPA and I've tried to work with DPR to try and fix this, but it's just hard. And so generally I just go direct to the manufacturer, and the manufacturer just sends cease and desist letters. But if I was in my office, I would be able to show you my boxes of rodenticide that has, like, we've gotten because we detected coumatetralyl. I was like, oh, I wonder, can I buy coumatetralyl? So I'm like, oh yeah, there we go, coumatetralyl. I've also got floccumifen, which is also not registered. Now, we don't test for floccumifen mainly because our lab doesn't offer it, but like it could be present. But the thing about it is that, like, I really don't want people to focus on the fact that we found this much illegal rodenticide when we're actually like 99% exposure. I mean, I am not saying that the pest management professionals of Southern California are doing something wrong. I just think that we have been focused on the wrong part of the food chain for so long. So we've been trying to focus on trying to decrease the amount of coyotes that are exposed to anticoagulants, when we should be looking at trying to decrease the amount of rats that are exposed to anticoagulant rodenticides. And so what we're proposing is that by killing rats effectively and not letting their populations rebound, you're actually decreasing the amount of rats that would be intoxicated or at least exposed in the environment. And so then the prey availability for everything, not just coyotes, but for birds of prey. And, of course we have our urban mountain lions, which is crazy in Los Angeles as well. And like, I don't know a lot about the mountain lions because that's not really my study system,
Yeah.
but like, it's like, are mountain lions eating roof rats too? Like, it just seems like, it seems bizarre,
Well,
right? Like, it doesn't seem.
they're being exposed. The last VPC showed they were being exposed to anticoagulants, so they're getting it from somewhere. So the
Yeah,
question that I would have is, so are you suggesting that people, obviously habitat modification, exclusion, which are, exclusion can be expensive for some people. That can be very
yeah.
difficult for them. But traps obviously would be another option here. Is the A24 good nature trap legal in your state? Is that,
For rats, for
for
rats,
rats
I
it's legal?
believe. Rats, I
Okay.
believe it is. Now, for ground squirrels and tree squirrels, you're getting on dodgy territory
Yeah. So
in California.
because there's anticoagulants for your ground squirrels
Exactly,
out
but
there.
coyotes don't eat that many ground squirrels, and we are like, now in our urban environments, we would have a lot of ground squirrels in our parks and in our in our kind of our, what we call them like non-production ag, like cemeteries, right of
Right.
ways, parks, that kind of stuff. And so, places where you can apply first generation anticoagulant rodenticide in, well, actually not even just in a bait station. There's opportunities to broadcast
You
in
can
some of those areas
broadcast
too,
or spot bait.
maybe spot bait, yeah,
Yep.
depending on what you're using. Obviously, and so like, it's very complicated. And so like, the one thing that we haven't done is, like, we haven't actually proven that a professional application causes exposure in wildlife. And so what we're doing is, I call this the glowing rat project. So we have this great team, actually, myself, Roger Baldwin from Davis, Leafa Tech. We're working with the National Wildlife Research Center in Colorado, but also their Carnivore Research Center in Utah, with Utah State. I hope I said Utah State, because if it's the other one, I'll be in big trouble if they listen to this. And I just say that I'm from Ireland and I don't know how to work America, and I kind of get away with it when I
Utah State
mistake
is the one with the Berriman Institute, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
So yes, so Utah
Yeah.
State. So Julie Young at the Utah State. And so what we're trying to do is it's really hard to trace a source application of anticoagulant rodenticide. Now, usually what people do is that they use a pesticide that's not registered in the United States. Well, hello, we don't really have that opportunity, because we already know that pesticides that are not registered in the United States are showing up in our wildlife.
Right.
And so I had this crazy idea, and everybody kept telling me that I was crazy, but I wouldn't listen to them. And so what we did was we made an isotopically labeled rodenticide.
Nice.
And so that's why I call it the glowing rat project. So it doesn't actually glow, but the idea is that this rodenticide should act exactly the same, and we should be able to trace it through multiple trophic layers. Now, the whole thing behind this is a crazy plan to try and monitor for rodenticide exposure non-lethally, because there's not really a good method to look for rodenticide. Right now, California probably has about the best data out there on wildlife exposure to anticoagulant rodenticide, but it's very haphazard. It's like, oh, a couple of sick animals here, a couple of roadkill here. We've tested 50 mountain lions, but none of them have actually died from exposure to rodenticide. And so we're trying to look at ways to use either feces or hair to trace it through both individuals and populations without killing them. And so that way, like, the whole aim essentially for all this is to be able to show if anticoagulant rodenticide has a population level effect on wildlife in the United States.
So are those isotopic baits out in the field now, or are they coming?
So no. So so we made them. So it's a very complicated process. So first of all, this process that I mentioned way back, this IACUC thing, institutional animal care, well, they don't like when you kill things. And especially not in California,
which is a problem for our field, because that's what we do. Yeah, it's not a little unfair. I think they need to get revised. Maybe we'll have to have a show on IACUC sometime.
Yeah, and so we wanted to kill a lot of rats.
Yeah.
And so we did it, and it was complicated because our manufacturing partner at the time, for this project, and I must mention as well that I have lots of other manufacturing partners for all of our other projects as well. Like, we had lots of donations from, Bell and JT Eaton and all these people
Hmm.
for bait stations and bait and all this kind of stuff as well. So we're very grateful to those two. But in Leaf Attack, they were going to poison the rats for us because they could do it very cheaply.
Right.
And you know, when you apply for grants, even though you could get these $330,000 grants, like if you go to a lab to try and get them to poison rats for you, like it's $100,000 of your money just gone already. You know what I mean? And like literally grams of the isotope would cost us like tens of thousands of dollars.
Wow.
And so this is obviously not something that is going to work for like for an application, like for a wide scale application.
Right.
For us, it's about trying to make the process. We need to be able to detect our compound, but we're also trying to make it so we're going to look for all the other normal compounds as well. So
Yeah.
like we can make this. So we kill the rats and we have shipped the rats to the next phase, which is trying to feed them to coyotes to see if we can detect the isotope up the food chain. So like
Okay.
basically one trophic level up. And so it's funny because right now we're actually going through the IACUC process for that. And I'm kind of delaying it a bit because we're trying to figure out how to make our sampling process in a way that's not going to result in a bald coyote. Because like they obviously need to thermoregulate. They're an outside colony. We don't want to like, you know, shave them every few days to the point where they have no fur left because
Right.
our IACUC, for good reason, wouldn't approve that.
Right.
So I'm trying to, it's been a very busy, it's the first 3 months of the year are never very good for me. So it's the January's over. So I have a little bit of a respite and we'll try and get that sorted.
We hope you have enjoyed this part one of our interview with Dr. Quinn of the University of California. So stay tuned for next week for part two. So the interview was so long that we needed to break it up into two parts because it went for an hour and a half. So stay tuned and sign up for our podcast and get next week's part two. Thanks.